When you look at the CTV ad market as it stands right now, I said that there's about 36% or so that's attributable to YouTube. There's about 10% or so that's attributable to Roku. But the remainder, that remaining 50, 60% or so, that's all coming from the legacy TV companies.
Hey gang, it's Monday, July 12th. Eric and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by one of our senior forecasting analysts. It's Eric Hagstrom.
Thanks for having me.
Hey buddy, thanks for being here. Today's fact, all standard CDs are 74 minutes long. So compact discs, CDs, were the first widely available digital recordings of music and were produced jointly by Philips and Sony corporations working together in the early 1980s. The first CDs were supposed to be 11.5 centimeters in diameter, but Sony insisted that they be 12 centimeters, large enough to hold 74 minutes of music. Supposedly, Sony's VP's vice president's wife was a huge fan of Beethoven, so the demand was based on the fact that the legendary Ninth Symphony is exactly 74 minutes long. I love how much influence she had on that decision. It was like, we've figured out the CD. It's going to be 60 minutes long. It's perfect. And she goes, yeah, no, it's not going to work for me. I'm going to need it to be 74 for Beethoven.
You go back to the vinyl records and you had your 45s and your LPs, and that was all determined by technology. I mean, so many records were the exact length that they were because of technological limitations at the time too.
Yeah, it's a true story. Today's real topic anyway is CTV and YouTube. So, Eric, around 40% of US ad impressions on YouTube now occur on TV screens. 40% of US ad impressions on YouTube now occur on TV screens. That's up from 12% just 2 years ago, reports The Information. Eric, if 40% of US ad impressions on YouTube are now occurring on TV screens, what does this mean? What's your takeaway here?
Well, it means a few things. First off, when you think about YouTube, generally people think about it as being mainly a mobile platform. But keep in mind that a lot of viewership on YouTube is not monetized. It's not on brand safe content. It's not on so-called premium content. And a lot of the ad dollars have been flowing to these connected TV screens as opposed to desktop and mobile viewership. And this is something that we've noticed for a while. 40% is a little bit higher than what we had assumed, given our various channel checks. But at the same time, this is a huge story. And ultimately, when you start talking about YouTube, a lot of people will say, oh, it's just cat videos. It's just people doing stupid things to go viral. But the platform itself has changed pretty significantly over the past couple of years. There's a significant amount of premium content. A lot of their monetization's coming from things like late night talk show reruns, things of that nature coming from the major TV companies. And the other thing too is that according to Nielsen, they released their new gauge, which measures total TV time, including both streaming and cable and broadcast.
Yeah, fascinating report.
Yeah, fantastic report. And they have YouTube at roughly 6% of total viewership time. Now, there's a couple asterisks that need to be placed on those numbers, but I think it's a really great representation, which is that 6% is in line with Netflix. And overall broadcast is at roughly a quarter of all streaming time. There's, 5 major broadcast networks, which would put YouTube in line with the CBSs and Foxes of the world roughly on average in terms of total TV time, which is incredible.
Yeah, it really is. Some other TV numbers from YouTube. In March, YouTube's top product manager, Neil Mohan, suggesting that users are watching the platform on TVs. The number of users who watch the platform, watch YouTube on TVs, increasing to 120 million versus 100 million a year before that. Eric, we have some US YouTube connected TV ad revenue numbers, don't we? What do those look like?
Well, when you look at YouTube connected TV ad revenues, it's a large and growing share of overall YouTube. And importantly, they are the largest, on a gross basis at least, the largest CTV ad seller in the US at the moment. With, I think our numbers are roughly 40% of the overall market, if I'm not mistaken.
Of CTV ad spending?
Yeah.
Yep, 36% pretty much.
Yeah, so between 36% or so of the overall market, which is larger than Hulu. It's significantly larger than Roku. It's significantly larger than any of the other ad-supported streaming services that have, shown really strong growth over the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's fascinating as well, because then that's 36% is not going up, and it's not going up because the market is just growing at such a rate that YouTube isn't able to keep up with it, or just about able to keep up with it. It's got, what, $5 billion in gross connected TV ad revenues for YouTube this year, $6 billion next year, about $7 billion the year after that. If we zoom out and look at the total CTV ad market, BMO Capital Markets suggesting that CTV ad spending in the US is projected to hit nearly $21 billion this year, which will grow an annual rate of about 23%, they say, for the next decade through to 2030, where it will reach CTV ad spending market will reach $100 billion by 2030. Eric, how do our estimates for overall CTV stack up?
Well, we're quite a bit lower, but what I want to make very clear is that definitions matter in the space. And when people say CTV or OTT, oftentimes everyone's talking about very similar things, but the details matter here. So when we talk about CTV, we're talking about any sort of advertising or any sort of viewership that happens on a connected TV screen other than your kind of linear content. So if you're watching Hulu with live TV, there's a lot of advertising that runs on there that we would just consider to be TV because it's the same ads that are running in linear, that you would see over your Comcast box. And we're not tracking mobile viewership or mobile advertising. We're just tracking what happens on that connected screen. Others may include that linear content, which I'm not entirely sure. I'm pretty sure that's what BMO is tracking.
Okay. Whereas
others, like Group M, recently came out with a number that they call their CTV Plus estimates, which are more for, they're taking the stance that any sort of advertising that happens that should be predominantly going over CTV screen. So all of Hulu, of which we take about 80%. But I believe they're not tracking YouTube, which we do track a portion of YouTube that happens on CTV.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, but ultimately, while the numbers may be different, we're all looking at the same market, and we're actually pretty close in terms of how, once you take out some of those definitions, we're pretty close in how we're tracking things. And I think it's really important too, because if you track it from the consumer side, consumers treat this differently than how advertisers look at it. When you look at that Nielsen data going back, people are consuming YouTube alongside linear content, alongside Netflix and Hulu. Whereas if you talk to advertisers, they treat generally YouTube as being very separate, and it's oftentimes a very separate team that's buying YouTube than the people who are buying Hulu or linear TV.
Well, you mentioned that consumers treat it quite similarly. Scott Schiller, Global Chief Commercial Officer, media marketing services company Engine, thinks that in today's media buying and selling ecosystem, we should try and forget the jargon, CTV, OTT, and linear TV. He says that for consumers, there's no difference between them. People watch their favorite content and they don't care how the infrastructure delivering that show has changed. Marketers should follow the consumer's lead and lean into the idea that CTV and OTT are TV. And he says the sooner the industry breaks away from legacy thinking, the sooner marketers will be able to tap into the true value of the convergent TV audience. Your thoughts on his remarks?
That's a pretty controversial statement, but what I will say in general is that when you look at the CTV ad market as it stands right now, I said that there's about 36% or so that's attributable to YouTube.
Yep.
There's about 10% or so that's attributable to Roku. Mm-hmm. But the remainder, that remaining 50-60% or so, that's all coming from the legacy TV companies. Your major TV companies. Disney owns Hulu, Comcast owns Peacock, Pluto and Tubi are owned by Viacom, CBS, and Fox, respectively. So when you're buying that media, you're oftentimes buying it alongside linear inventory, or you're buying it from very similar sales teams, if not the same sales team, as your linear TV buys. So everything is starting to converge. I don't want to get into the whole idea of convergence because that's not actually the case. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of the same companies that are acting in this space. And even someone like a Roku is selling this kind of advertising in a very TV-like manner. They were active at the upfronts and new fronts. Even YouTube was active at the upfronts and the new fronts as well. And when we kind of go back to YouTube, a lot of that viewership is tied to TV-type content, late night reruns, things of that nature. The one thing I would mention about YouTube is that the number one type of form of content on YouTube is music, which is something that really isn't, when you look at the rest of CTV, no one really exists in that space other than Spotify or Pandora. And it's a little bit more complicated in general. But
according to that information report that we mentioned at the top, which was talking about that 40% of the US ad impressions on YouTube now occurring on TV screens, they also noted that many traditional TV advertisers are still balking, quotation marks, at moving over ad dollars to YouTube en masse. Why do you think this is, Eric?
Well, keep in mind, they're 6% of overall viewing time, according to Nielsen. They take up a slightly larger share of CTV ad-supported viewing time and a larger share of, overall ad-supported viewing time because, Netflix and HBO and all that don't have ads. But keep in mind that this is a growing space and, ultimately monetization generally lags viewership a little bit. I wouldn't say that advertisers are balking at what YouTube's offering because they are spending a lot of money with YouTube and it's growing pretty significantly. But at the same time, we only need to look back a few years ago to hear of all the brand safety issues that were happening on YouTube. And they've seemed to have fixed a lot of those major issues. But again, people still remember. So keep in mind, they have a great product. They're growing significantly. Advertisers are allocating a lot of money to them, and we expect that to continue to grow. They're advertising more money to them than they are to any other CTV advertising player. Just looking at the CTV side, not even talking about mobile and desktop, but keep in mind, there's a lot of room for them to grow.
Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, it's just 6% of viewership on TVs going to YouTube. And that's compared to, according to the Nielsen Gauge report, compared to 64%, 2/3 of the total audience, which is still going to linear methods to consume TV. And Insider Intelligence analyst Nina Getson agrees with you with regards to content quality, saying it's a significant hurdle for TV advertisers. And while YouTube's vast library of user-generated content is great for driving viewership, marketers have to worry about brand safety, suitability more than traditional TV, saying at the same time, more streaming services with extensive and quality assured libraries like HBO Max and Paramount Plus launching ad-supported tiers that could threaten YouTube's dominance.
I don't think it will threaten whatsoever. It's just going to add to the pie over time. Yeah. I mean, this is the issue with YouTube. A lot of people think of YouTube as just being cat videos and, kind of user-generated, viral content, whereas a lot of the content that's actually being monetized is this more professionally produced TV-like content. I mean, you can look at a show like Binging Like Babish or some of the shows that Vice puts out around food, and it's of comparable quality to what you would see on, the Food Network or even PBS at times. So, just keep in mind that it's not completely user-generated anymore. A lot of it's very much professionally produced. It's just in a different format at the end of the day, in different companies.
I love when people reference different shows and Victoria gives that nod of approval, like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I watch my fair share of cooking shows on YouTube, and I have Discovery Plus, and I love it. But I watch both.
You're a good cook, Eric. It's got to come from somewhere.
I know.
So I've heard. Anyway, CTV ad spending compared to TV in terms of total media dollars. CTV ad spending is 5% of the total ad spending pie in the US versus TV's 23%. So 5 for CTV, 23 for TV. But CTV is growing at nearly 50% versus TV's 7% growth. By 2025, CTV will be 7% of the pie versus TV's 17% of the pie. Put another way, today's CTV ad dollars are nearly 5 times smaller than TV. In 4 years, CTV will be 2.5 times smaller. Eric, let's finish with an article by Daniel Meehan, CEO and founder of digital media company Pad Squared. Recently wrote a piece in Adweek talking about how CTV ads need to evolve. Titled, "The 1940s Called, They Want Their TV Spot Back." His point is that since the first official TV ad aired in 1941, when watch company Belova ran a 10-second spot for $9, TV ads haven't really been reimagined, with advertisers by and large using existing video assets and shoving them onto CTV. He suggests using rich ad formats that let viewers engage with the ad via their remote control. He also suggests using QR codes, which have been given a second wind because of the pandemic, as people use them for contact tracing and viewing restaurant menus. Also, people can just use their camera app now and not have to download a separate QR code app. QR codes, he says, would help marketers bridge the world of TV and mobile by making TV actionable Consumers should be able to scan a QR code from their couch and easily add to cart, is what he says. Eric, what did you make of this piece?
I'm conflicted, to be honest with you. When we look across all of media, shoppable ads, whether it's, something like, Amazon sponsored products ad format or Google Shopping or what Facebook's doing with Instagram Shop, that sort of thing, are growing like crazy and marketers are really adopting them. But when you start talking about shoppable TV ads, where I start to kind of question things is that a lot of commerce happens on your desktop and mobile devices. Not a whole lot of commerce exists on your TV, and you're introducing more friction when you say you need to scan this QR code on a TV ad that you may or may not be watching in order to potentially buy a product or research it further. I'm really excited to see a lot of the experimentation that's happening in new formats, but at the same time, I'm a little skeptical of shoppable specifically, where I do think that there's a lot of room for innovation is just targeting measurement so that you can tie your TV and CTV ad buys to sales in a more granular way, like you can with some mobile and desktop ad formats. Yeah,
it's such an interesting concept. I mean, if you're asking people to get up from their couch and go to the TV and scan the code, and people will hunt for the remote for like an hour to save having to get up to press buttons on their TV to change the channel, if the TV even has buttons anymore. But yeah, being able to scan something and have the ad, the product jump from the TV screen onto your phone, pretty compelling. CTV numbers from eMarketer. Eric, I imagine you worked on these, like every other number it seems that we've covered. You seem to have worked on $13 billion in 2021 CTV ad spending. That's going to double in the next 4 years to $27 billion. As I mentioned before, it's growing 50% this year, accounting for 5% of the total media ad spending pie. CTV, 5% of the total media ad spending pie this year, and 5.5% next year, close to 7% by 2025. All right, that's all we've got time for the first half of the show. It's time now for the halftime report, where we summarize the key takeaways from the lead story in 30 seconds or less. Eric, your key takeaway from the first half is?
CTV advertising is growing. Increasingly, a significant amount of the spend is going to your legacy media companies, your Disneys, Viacom, CBSs of the world. But ultimately, YouTube is a major player in the space and probably should be looked at alongside a lot of these more quote-unquote premium offerings.
The lead story is over. Time now for In Other News, but first a quick word from our sponsor, VTEX. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast and flexible and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. Go to VTEX, VTEX.com/eMarketer to learn more. All right, folks, we are back today in other news. The bird's eye view of Amazon's ad business. NBC Universal wants primetime TV ad rates for slots on Peacock, and Nielsen rolled out a new solution for measuring podcast ad effectiveness. Story 1. A recent article by James Hersher of Ad Exchanger discusses the bird's eye view of Amazon's ad business. Mr. Hersher writes that, quote, its DSP footprint now rivals Google, and it has the second most used SSP. The online retailer earned over $22 billion in ad revenue just in the past year. Close quote. That's what Mr. Hersher is saying. He points out 4 key growth areas for Amazon advertising. It's video ambitions, it's increasing work with non-endemic advertisers, it's conquesting capabilities, and it's leveling up in targeting and measurement. Eric, your thoughts on the article and these growth areas?
Ultimately, when you look at Amazon, their ad business started as a very lower funnel, ads on Amazon.com trying to drive purchases right there and then. And ultimately, what they've been doing is they've been trying to move up the funnel. And I think that there's a significant amount of room for them to grow in that space. The key area of that growth is going to be CTV, with their footprint of Amazon Fire TVs in a significant amount of US households. And this is essentially Roku's business. They are at a similar scale in terms of viewers as Roku, but ultimately they can use all the targeting capabilities they have and all the great shopper data that they have to demand a higher price and ultimately have more effective ads on the platform.
Story 2. In March, Variety had reported that NBC Universal wanted primetime TV ad rates for slots running on its own streaming service, Peacock. As insider intelligence analyst Mario Soto-Reyes points out, quote, that NBC Universal announced back in January 2020 that it was working to create a unified ad tech and sales structure for marketers centered around one platform, capital O, capital P, which would act as an end-to-end solution across its digital and TV properties. So it's making the case that traditional primetime isn't the only time ads should be worth their weight in gold, because with streaming, viewers can watch their preferred content at any time. Eric, your thoughts on this pricing dilemma?
Well, ultimately, CTV and streaming ads have traded at a significantly higher premium compared to overall TV for a while. But there are parts of the overall TV market, like primetime, that do command much higher CPMs. So this is, really smart on NBCU just trying to sell, everything and, get price increases where they can. And long term, when you look at what's happening with streaming, I don't expect that prices will rise significantly, especially as overall it becomes less of a, audience extension. But as more targeting capabilities move in and you can better measure your ad effectiveness alongside linear, I think that CPMs will begin to rise. Probably next few years, though, will be a little choppy.
In terms of sheer scale, TV viewership, which has been on the decline since 2012, the last 9 years, is still at 252 million people this year, down just 3% from last year. That's still much bigger audience than Netflix, 175. So 252 for TV, 175 for Netflix, or the 110 for Hulu. Peacock reportedly has 42 million signups as of the end of April, but of course...
And what does sign up mean? It's not comparable to any of those numbers whatsoever.
Yes, exactly. Great question. Story 3. In May, Nielsen rolled out a new solution for measuring podcast ad effectiveness, rather fittingly called Podcast Ad Effectiveness Plus, PAE Plus. As insider intelligence analyst Mario Soto-Reyes notes, quote, PAE Plus aims to help marketers track brand lift and memorability across audio show listeners. With PAE Plus, Nielsen is expanding its existing PAE solution to now let marketers measure digitally inserted ads in live podcasts, close quote. Eric, what do you see as the highest hurdle for podcast advertising?
Well, ultimately, it's still a very fractured industry. Viewership split between, countless numbers of podcasts, countless numbers of services. Oftentimes, you're still downloading the podcast to your device rather than streaming it, which creates a lot of difficulty. But I think ultimately what Spotify has been doing, as well as others, in helping stream, helping create more, better tech here, digital ad insertion is, key, will help the industry grow. And ultimately measurement is the main problem. And whether Nielsen or someone else can help effectively measure podcast advertising alongside other forms of media, which are more measurable, it should lead to growth in the overall market.
Today, 35% of Americans listen to podcasts. In 4 years' time, 42% will. So from 35 to 42 over the next 4 years. Put another way, 118 million people listen to podcasts. That's double the number of Americans who use Twitter. So we've got time for today. Thank you so much, Eric, for hanging out.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, my friend. And thank you so much to everyone listening in. Thank you to Victoria, who edits the show. We'll see you guys tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX.